The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone corridors of Kensington Palace as Prince William walked slowly toward his father's private study. His footsteps echoed softly against the polished floors, each step carrying the weight of recent conversations that had left him deeply troubled. The palace, usually bustling with staff and visitors, felt unusually quiet that Tuesday morning in March 2023. William had been wrestling with a decision for weeks. The relationship between his father, King Charles III, and his brother Harry had reached a breaking point that seemed impossible to mend. The public feuds, the interviews, the tell-all book, everything had created a chasm that appeared to grow wider with each passing day. As the heir to the throne, William felt the responsibility of his position weighing heavily on his shoulders. The night before, Catherine had found him standing by their bedroom window, staring out at the gardens where he and Harry had once played. "As children, you're thinking about him again," she had said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. William had simply nodded, unable to find the words to express the complex emotions swirling within him. "I keep remembering when we were boys," he had finally whispered. "After Mom died, we promised each other we'd always be there for one another. We swore we'd never let anything come between us." Catherine had listened quietly as William continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "Oh, I don't even know if he'd take my call." The memories of their childhood bond seemed both precious and painful now. William recalled how they had comforted each other during their darkest moments, how they had shared secrets and dreams, and how they had faced the world together as brothers, united by loss and love. The thought that all of that might be irreparably broken was almost too much to bear. King Charles had been equally affected by the ongoing rift with Harry. William had noticed how his father's shoulders seemed to carry an invisible burden. His smiles didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. The king had tried to maintain his royal composure in public, but in private moments, the pain was evident. William had caught glimpses of his father staring at old family photographs, his fingers tracing the faces of happier times. The decision to approach his father that morning hadn't come easily. William had spent sleepless nights wondering if he was overstepping boundaries or if his intervention might make things worse. But something deep inside him, perhaps the same instinct that had made him a devoted husband and father, told him that silence was no longer an option. As he approached the study door, William could hear the faint sound of his father's voice. Charles was on the phone, speaking in the measured tones he used for official business. William paused, his hand hovering near the door handle. He took a deep breath, thinking of his own children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and how he would feel if they were ever estranged from one another. The conversation inside the study came to an end, and William heard the soft click of the phone being placed back in its cradle. This was his moment. He raised his hand and knocked gently on the heavy wooden door. "Come in," came his father's voice from within. William turned the handle and stepped into the room. King Charles was seated behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by the familiar comforts of his private space, books on architecture and organic farming, watercolor paintings he had created himself, and photographs of family members spanning generations. The king looked up, and William could see the weariness in his eyes. "William," Charles said, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and warmth. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." "Father, I know you're busy, but I was hoping we could talk," William said, his voice steady, despite the nervous energy he felt. "It's about Harry." At the mention of his younger son's name, something shifted in King Charles's expression. The formal mask he wore for the world seemed to slip away, revealing the vulnerable father beneath. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and William took a seat. "I've been thinking a lot about our family," William began, choosing his words carefully. "About what Mom would want for us, and what kind of legacy we're creating for our children." He paused, studying his father's face. "I can see how much pain this situation is causing you, and I can't stand by and watch anymore." Charles leaned back in his chair, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "William, I appreciate your concern, but some bridges may be too damaged to repair." "But what if they're not?" William pressed gently. "What if there's still a chance to heal what's been broken? I know Harry said things that hurt us all, but underneath all that anger and frustration, I still see my little brother. The boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who laughed until he cried at our silly jokes." The king's composure began to crumble as William continued. "I miss him, father. I miss the sound of his laugh, the way he could make anyone feel it, ease his passion for helping others. I miss my brother, and I know you miss your son." Charles removed his reading glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. When he looked up again, William could see the raw emotion there, the grief of a father who felt he had lost a child, the regret of words spoken in anger, and the desperate hope that somehow, some way, healing might still be possible. "I've wanted to reach out so many times," Charles admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't know how. Every time I've tried to extend an olive branch, it's been rejected or misunderstood. I'm afraid that if I try again and fail, it might be the final nail in the coffin of our relationship." William leaned forward, his heart breaking for both his father and his absent brother. "Then maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to stop thinking like a king and start thinking like a dad." The silence in the study stretched between father and son as Charles considered William's words. Outside, the London traffic hummed in the distance, a reminder that the world continued to spin despite the private drama unfolding within the palace walls. William watched his father's face, seeing the internal struggle between royal duty and paternal love playing out in real time. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Charles asked finally, his voice cautious but tinged with curiosity. William had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, but now that it was here, he found himself speaking from the heart rather than from any prepared script. "I think we need to stop approaching this as an institution trying to manage a crisis and start approaching it as a family trying to heal." He stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the palace gardens, the same gardens where he, Harry, and their cousins had played cricket on summer afternoons, where their mother had chased them with water balloons, where they had built countless memories that seemed like they belonged to a different lifetime. "Remember when Harry broke his arm falling from that old oak tree?" William asked, still looking out the window. "You didn't summon him to a formal meeting to discuss proper tree climbing protocol. You held him while he cried. You stayed with him at the hospital, and you made sure he knew he was loved despite making a mistake." Charles joined his son at the window, following his gaze to the ancient oak that still stood proudly in the garden. "He was only 8 years old," the king murmured. "So brave, trying not to cry until he was safely in my arms. He's still that same person, father. It's underneath all the hurt and anger. He's still the little boy who needs to know his family loves him." William turned to face his father directly. "I think he's been acting out of pain, not malice. When people are drowning, sometimes they lash out at the very people trying to save them." The king's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But the things he said about Camilla, about the family, about me, ... How do we move past that?" "The same way you moved past my mistakes when I was younger," William replied gently. "Remember when I was photographed doing things I shouldn't have been doing? When I made choices that embarrassed the family? You didn't cut me off. You helped me learn and grow from those experiences." Charles nodded slowly, remembering his eldest son's own journey, from a rebellious young man to the responsible father and future king he had become. "You're right. We all make mistakes, especially when we're in pain." William pulled out his phone, his hands slightly trembling. "I've been carrying Harry's number in my contacts, staring at it every day for months. I keep typing messages and deleting them, wanting to reach out but not knowing what to say." "What stops you?" Charles asked. "Fear," William admitted honestly. "Fear that he'll reject me, that he'll see any attempt at reconciliation as manipulation, or a public relations stunt. Fear that I'll make things worse instead of better." Charles placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "And yet here you are, taking that same risk with me." "Because some risks are worth taking," William said firmly. "Because family is worth fighting for, even when it's messy and complicated and painful." The king walked back to his desk and picked up a framed photograph that had been turned face down for months. In it, a younger Charles stood with his arms around both William and Harry at Harry's passing out ceremony at Sandhurst. All three men were beaming with pride and joy. "I turned this over after his book came out," Charles confessed. "It hurt too much to look at, but maybe it's time to turn it back around." William felt a surge of hope as he watched his father. Set the photograph upright again, if he could start small. Not a grand gesture that might feel overwhelming, but something genuine and personal. "What did you have in mind?" William's voice grew stronger as he spoke, the idea crystallizing as he shared it. "What if you wrote him a letter? Not a formal statement or a diplomatic message, but a real letter from a father to his son. Tell him about the oak tree. Tell him about the photographs you've been unable to look at. Tell him how much you miss him." Charles was quiet for a long moment, considering the suggestion. "And if he doesn't respond, then at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll know that you chose love over pride." William's voice was thick with emotion. Maybe it will plant a seed that can grow into something beautiful in time." The king walked to an antique writing desk in the corner of the room. A piece that had belonged to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. He opened a drawer and pulled out a sheet of personal stationery, cream-colored paper, with his private monogram embossed at the top. "I don't even know where to begin," Charles admitted, sitting down at the desk with the blank paper before him. William approached and stood beside his father's chair. "Begin with the truth. Begin with love." Charles picked up his fountain pen, the same one he had used to sign official documents and personal letters for decades. His hand hovered over the paper for a moment before he began to write, "My dearest Harry, ... As his father's pen moved across the paper, William felt something shift in the room. The heavy atmosphere of regret and sorrow began to lift slightly, replaced by something that felt like hope. He watched as Charles poured his heart onto the page, writing about memories they shared, about regrets he carried, about love that had never wavered despite everything that had happened. The letter grew longer as Charles continued writing, his initial hesitation giving way to a flood of emotions that had been bottled up for too long. He wrote about Harry's childhood, about the pride he felt watching him serve in the military, about the joy of seeing him find love with Meghan, about the pain of watching their relationship deteriorate. When Charles finally set down his pen, both men were quiet. The letter sat between them, 3 pages of honest, heartfelt words that laid bare a father's love and longing. Charles folded the letter carefully, his fingers lingering on the edges of the paper as if reluctant to let it go. The weight of his words seemed to settle in the room, creating an atmosphere thick with possibility and fear in equal measure. "Now, what?" he asked William, his voice barely above a whisper. William looked at his father, seeing vulnerability in a man who had spent his entire life being strong for others. "Now we trust in the power of love to bridge even the widest gaps." The next few hours passed in a blur of careful planning and nervous energy. William volunteered to personally deliver the letter, knowing that a formal postal delivery or courier service would rob the gesture of its intimacy. They decided that William would fly to California quietly, without the usual fanfare or media attention that accompanied royal travel. "I'll go as a brother, not as a prince," William told his father. As they made the arrangements, "This isn't about duty or protocol. This is about family." The flight to Los Angeles gave William 13 hours to think, to worry, and to hope. He stared out the airplane window at the clouds below, remembering all the times he and Harry had traveled together, official tours, family vacations, shared adventures that had bonded them as brothers. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, he pulled out his phone and looked at old photos of them together, each image a reminder of what they had been to each other and what they might be again. When the plane touched down at LAX, William felt his heart racing. He had made this journey on official business many times before, but this trip felt different. Everything about it was personal, intimate, and terrifying in its importance. The drive to Montecito took him through familiar California landscapes. William barely noticed the scenery. His mind was focused on the conversation he was about to have, the words he might need to say, and the reaction he might receive. In his jacket pocket, his father's letter felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. As the car pulled up to Harry and Meghan's home, William was struck by how normal it looked. Somehow he had expected something grander or more fortress-like. But instead, he saw a beautiful but modest house that looked like a real family home. Children's toys were scattered on the front lawn, and he could see evidence of the life his brother had built in this new world. William stood at the front door for a full minute before ringing the bell, his heart pounding so hard he was sure it could be heard on the other side of the door. When the door finally opened, he found himself face to face with Megan. Her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, wariness, confusion, and finally, something that might have been cautious hope. "William," she said softly, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know this is sudden," William replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I was hoping I could speak with Harry. It's important." Megan studied his face for a moment, perhaps looking for signs of scent. The anger or judgment that had characterized so many of their recent interactions. Instead, she seemed to see something different. Vulnerability, perhaps, or genuine concern. "He's in the garden with the children," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "William, I have to ask. ... Is everything all right? Is someone hurt?" William assured her. "But I think we're all hurting in other ways, and I'm hoping to start healing some of those wounds." Megan led him through the house, which was warm and lived in, filled with family photos and children's artwork. William caught glimpses of his nephew and niece in the pictures, Archie and Lilibet, who he barely knew, but who shared his family's blood and his father's eyes. Through the large windows that faced the backyard, William could see Harry playing with the children on a swing. Set. His brother looked relaxed and happy, pushing 4-year-old Archie on a swing, while 2-year-old Lilibet toddled around nearby. The scene was so peaceful and normal that William almost hesitated to interrupt it. "Harry," Megan called softly as they stepped onto the patio. "You have a visitor?" Harry turned around, and when he saw William, his entire body went rigid. The easy smile faded from his face, replaced by a guarded expression that broke William's heart. For a moment, the brothers just stared at each other across the garden. Years of hurt and misunderstanding stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm. "William," Harry said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "this is unexpected." "I know," William replied, taking a tentative step forward. "I should have called first, but I was afraid you might not want to see me." Harry glanced at his children, then back at his brother. "Archie, Lily, why don't you go inside with Mama for a snack?" he said gently. "Uncle William and I need to talk." The word "uncle" hit William like a physical blow, reminding him of all the moments he had missed, all the relationships that had been damaged by their conflict. He watched as Megan gathered the children, noting how Archie looked at him with curious eyes, his nephew, who barely knew him, who might never know him if this conversation went badly. When they were alone, Harry crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive posture that made him look younger and more vulnerable than William had expected. "So," Harry said, "what brings the heir to my humble California home?" William flinched at the bitter tone in his brother's voice, but he pressed forward. "Dad asked me to give you something," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out the letter. Harry stared at the cream-colored envelope as if it might explode. "I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever lecture or ultimatum is in there." "It's not a lecture," William said softly. "It's not an ultimatum. It's a letter from a father who misses his son desperately." Something flickered in Harry's eyes at those words, but his defensive posture remained. "And what about you? Do you miss your brother? Or are you just here as the dutiful son, following orders?" The question hung in the air between them, and William felt tears prick at his eyes. "I miss you every single day," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I miss your laugh. I miss your terrible jokes. I miss having someone who understands what it's like to grow up the way we did. I miss my brother." Harry's defensive posture wavered at William's heartfelt words, his arms slowly uncrossed, and William could see the internal battle playing out on his brother's face, the desire to believe warring with the fear of being hurt again. "You have a funny way of showing it," Harry said, but there was less venom in his voice now, more sadness than anger. "All those months of silence, all those opportunities to reach out." "I was scared," William admitted, taking another step closer. "Scared that anything I said would be taken the wrong way, scared that I'd make things worse instead of better. But that fear was keeping me from fighting for the most important relationship in my life." Harry looked down at the letter in William's outstretched hand, then back up at his brother's face. "What does he say in there?" "Why don't you read it and find out?" William said gently. "But Harry, before you do, I need you to know something. This isn't a trap or a manipulation. Dad wrote this letter with tears in his eyes, pouring out his heart because he loves you and he's lost without you." Harry took the letter with trembling hands, holding it as if it were made of the most fragile glass. "I don't know if I can handle more disappointment, William. I don't know if I'm strong enough for another rejection." "You're the strongest person I know," William said firmly. "You survived losing Mum when you were just a child. You served your country with honor in Afghanistan. You built a new life from scratch in a foreign country. You're raising two beautiful children who adore you. Anyone can handle whatever's in that letter, it's you." Harry walked over to a garden bench and sat down heavily, still staring at the unopened envelope. William followed and sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to offer support if needed. "Do you remember," William said softly, "when we were teenagers and Dad would make us write thank you notes for Christmas presents? You always complained that you never knew what to say, that words weren't enough to express how you really felt." Harry's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "And you always finished yours in 5 minutes while I agonized for hours." "Well, Dad spent 3 hours writing this letter," William said. 3 hours choosing each word carefully, trying to find a way to tell you everything he's been carrying in his heart. Harry's hand shook slightly as he opened the envelope and unfolded the pages. William watched his brother's face as he read, seeing emotions flicker across his features like clouds across the sky. At first, Harry's expression was guarded, skeptical. But as he continued reading, his features began to soften. Tears started rolling down Harry's cheeks as he read about their shared memories, camping trips in Scotland. The time Harry had gotten lost at Balmoral and Charles had searched for him. For hours, the pride Charles had felt watching Harry graduate from Sandhurst. William could see his brother's defenses crumbling with each paragraph. When Harry reached the part where Charles wrote about turning their family photograph face down, and then turning it back up again, a sob escaped his throat. "He kept our picture," Harry whispered. "Never stopped loving you," William said quietly. "Not for a single moment. Even when he was angry, even when he was hurt, the love was always there." Harry continued reading, his tears falling more freely. Now, Charles had written about his regrets, about words spoken in anger that he wished he could take back, about sleepless nights wondering if his son was happy and healthy and safe. He wrote about watching Harry's interviews and seeing the pain behind the anger, wanting desperately to reach out but not knowing how. The final paragraph of the letter was perhaps the most powerful. Charles had written, "My dearest son, I know. I have failed you in many ways, and I know that simple words on paper cannot undo the hurt we have both caused. But I need you to know that you are loved beyond measure, that you are missed every single day, and that there is nothing, absolutely nothing you could ever do that would make me stop being proud to be your father. The door to our family, to our hearts, is always open to you. We are not complete without you." When Harry finished reading, he folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, and William instinctively reached out to put an arm around his brother. To his relief, Harry didn't pull away. "I've been so angry for so long," Harry said through his tears. "I convinced myself that I didn't need them, that I was better off without the family drama and expectations. But I miss him too, William. I miss Dad. I miss you. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere." "You do belong," William said firmly. "You belong with us. You're my brother, and nothing will ever change that. Not distance, not disagreements, not anything." They sat in silence for several minutes, both men crying quietly as years of pent-up emotion finally found release. The California sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. And William thought about how this moment might be the beginning of healing, not just for Harry and Charles, but for their entire family. "I don't know how to come back from this," Harry said eventually. "So much has been said and done. The media circus, the public feuds, the hurt feelings on all sides. How do we move forward?" "One step at a time," William replied. "One conversation at a time, one act of love and forgiveness at a time. Harry looked at his brother with red-rimmed eyes. Do you think he meant what he wrote? About the door always being open? I think Dad has been standing at that door waiting for you to walk through it, William said. And I think if you're ready to try, he'll be the happiest father in the world. Harry wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked toward the house where his own children were probably having dinner. What about Megan? What about Archie? And Lily? This affects them too. They're part of you, which means they're part of us, William said without hesitation. Dad wants to know his grandchildren, Harry. He wants to be in their lives, to spoil them the way he spoils my kids. I want my children to know their cousins. For the first time since William had arrived, Harry's face broke into a genuine smile. George and Charlotte and Louis. They must be getting so big they ask about you sometimes, William admitted. Charlotte especially. She remembers you visiting when she was little, how you used to make her laugh. She wants to know why Uncle Harry doesn't come to visit anymore. The smile faded from Harry's face, replaced by a look of profound sadness. I never wanted the children to be caught in the middle of this mess. The mention of the children seemed to unlock something in Harry that had been carefully guarded for years. He stood up from the bench and walked to the edge of the garden, looking out over the rolling hills of Montecito. William followed, sensing that his brother was wrestling with something profound. You know what the hardest part has been? Harry said, his voice barely audible. It hasn't been the media criticism or the public backlash. It's been lying awake at night wondering if I made the right choice, wondering if I threw away everything that mattered for my own pride. William felt his throat tighten with emotion. Harry, you didn't throw anything away? Family isn't something you can lose just because of arguments or misunderstandings. It's always there, waiting for you to come home. But what if I've changed too much? Harry asked, turning to face his brother. What if I'm not the person they remember? What if I don't fit into that world anymore? Then we'll figure out a new way to fit together, William said simply. Families evolve, Harry. They adapt. What matters isn't whether you're exactly the same person you were before, it's whether you still love each other enough to build something new. Harry was quiet for a long moment, processing his brother's words. Then, suddenly, he laughed, not the bitter, sarcastic laugh William had been hearing, but the genuine, warm laugh that had been missing from their lives for so long. Do you remember, Harry said, wiping fresh tears from his eyes, when we were kids and we'd have those massive fights? We'd scream at each other, say horrible things, swear we'd never speak again. And then an hour later, one of us would knock on the other's door with a peace offering, usually chocolate stolen from the kitchen. William smiled at the memory. And we'd sit on the floor eating chocolate and wondering what we'd been so angry about in the first place. Maybe some things don't change as much as we think they do, Harry said softly. At that moment, the back door opened and Megan appeared with Archie and Lilibet. The children had clearly finished their dinner and were ready to return to their evening playtime. Archie ran straight to Harry, wrapping his little arms around his father's legs. "Adie, can we play more swings?" the 4-year-old asked. Harry lifted his son into his arms. William was struck by how natural and loving Harry was as a father. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the pain and confusion, his brother had created this beautiful life for his family. In a few minutes, buddy, Harry said gently, Daddy's talking with Uncle William right now. Lilibet, who had been hiding behind Megan's legs, peeked out at William with curious eyes. She had Charles's distinctive features and Harry's mischievous expression, and William felt his heart break a little at how much of her life he had already missed. "Hello, Lilibet," William said softly, crouching down to her level. "I'm your Uncle William. I've been wanting to meet you for such a long time." The little girl looked up at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Then she toddled over to William and placed a small hand on his cheek, studying his face with the intense curiosity that only toddlers possess. "You look like Daddy," she announced. Matter-of-factly. William laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. "People say that sometimes. We're brothers, like how you and Archie are brother and sister." Archie, still in Harry's arms, leaned over to look at William more closely. "Are you a prince like Daddy used to be?" The question hung in the air, loaded with complexity that the child couldn't possibly understand. William looked at Harry, unsure how to answer. "Yes," Harry said quietly. answering for William. Uncle William is a prince. In fact, he's going to be the king someday, like Grandpa Charles, Archie asked. William's breath caught at hearing his father referred to as Grandpa. Charles. Despite everything, Harry had clearly told his children about their grandfather. He had kept that connection alive, even when everything else was broken. Yes, like Grandpa Charles, William confirmed. Would you like to meet him someday? Both children looked at Harry, sensing that this was an important question. Harry met William's eyes over his son's head, and in that moment, William saw his brother make a decision that would change everything. Would you like to meet your grandfather? Harry asked his children gently. He's been wanting to meet you. For a very long time, Archie nodded enthusiastically, but Lilibet looked uncertain. Will he like me? She asked in her tiny voice. Harry's eyes filled with tears again as he knelt down to be at his daughter's level. Oh, sweetheart, he's going to love you so much. You're named after his grandmother. Did you know that? Queen Elizabeth was her name, but everyone who loved her called her Lilibet, just like you. Really? The little girl asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Really? Harry confirmed. And Grandpa Charles has been waiting his whole life to hug you and tell you stories and spoil you with presents. William watched this tender exchange between father and daughter, feeling overwhelmed by the beauty and complexity of family love. These children had been caught in the middle of adult conflicts they couldn't understand. But they had also been protected by parents who loved them fiercely. Megan, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Why don't we take the children inside and get them ready for bed, she suggested. You two still have a lot to talk about. As Megan led the children back into the house, she paused next to William. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming. Here, for bringing that letter, for giving us all a chance to heal. After the family had gone inside, the brothers found themselves alone in the garden again. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the air was filled with the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the ocean. I want to call him, Harry said suddenly. I want to call Dad and tell him I read his letter. William pulled out his phone. It's early morning in London. He's probably having breakfast, checking the newspapers, pretending to be interested in his official schedule, while really just hoping to hear from you. Harry took the phone with shaking hands. What if I don't know what to say? You start with I. Love you, William suggested. Everything else will follow from there. Harry dialed the familiar number, his heart pounding as he listened to the international rings. When Charles answered, his voice was cautious, formal. William? Is everything? All right, Dad, Harry said, his voice breaking on the word. It's me. It's Harry. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for what felt like an eternity. William could see Harry's hands trembling as he held the device to his ear, waiting for his father's response. In that moment, years of pain, regret, and longing hung in the balance. Harry? Charles's voice came through the speaker, thick with emotion and disbelief. My boy, is it really you? Yes, Dad, it's me, Harry said, tears streaming down his face. I got your letter. William brought it to me, and I need you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too angry and hurt to show it. William could hear his father's sharp intake of breath across the ocean, followed by what sounded like muffled sobs. When Charles spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I love you too, son. More than you'll ever know. I've missed you every single day. I'm sorry, Dad, Harry choked out. I'm so sorry for everything I said, for the pain I caused, for making you choose between your duty and your son. I was hurting, and I hurt everyone else in the process. No, my darling boy, Charles said firmly, his voice growing stronger. The one who should apologize? I'm your father, and I should have found a way to protect you, to support you, to make you feel valued and loved within our family. I failed you, and I've regretted it every day since. William watched his brother collapse onto the garden bench, overwhelmed by the weight of forgiveness being offered so freely. Years of built-up resentment and pain seemed to flow out of Harry. With each word exchanged between father and son, Can you forgive me? Harry asked, his voice small and vulnerable like the child he had once been. There's nothing to forgive, Charles replied without hesitation. You're my son, and nothing you could ever do would change that. Question is, Can you forgive a foolish old man who let pride and protocol get in the way of love? Of course. I forgive you, Harry said, laughing through his tears. We're family. That's what families do. William felt his own eyes fill with tears as he listened to this conversation he had dreamed about for so long. The healing that was taking place before his eyes was more beautiful and profound than anything he could have imagined. Dad, Harry continued, his voice growing more animated, I want you to meet your grandchildren. Archie and Lilibet, they're incredible and they want to know their grandfather. We've been telling them stories about you, and they can't wait to meet you. Charles's sob of joy was audible even from where William sat. I would love nothing more in this world than to meet them, to hold them, to be part of their lives. And Megan, Harry added, she wants to try again too. She feels terrible about how everything unfolded, and she's hoping for a fresh start. She's your wife and the mother of my grandchildren, Charles said warmly. She will always be welcome in our family. Always. The conversation continued for another hour, with father and son sharing memories, expressing regrets, and making plans for the future. They talked about Harry's children, about his work with veterans and mental health causes, about Charles's hopes for his reign as king. They talked about Diana, remembering her together and acknowledging how her loss had shaped both of their lives in profound ways. When William's phone finally died, cutting off the call, both brothers sat in stunned silence. The magnitude of what had just happened was almost too much to process. He wants us to come home, Harry said finally, staring up at the star-filled sky. Not permanently. Not to give up our life here, but for a visit. To bring the children too. Meet him. To have dinner as a family. To start rebuilding what we lost. How do you feel about that? William asked gently. Harry was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully. Terrified, he admitted, but also hopeful. For the first time in years, I feel like maybe we can find our way back to each other. Children would love it, William said. George and Charlotte and Louis have been asking about their Uncle Harry for years, and Dad? Dad lights up whenever anyone mentions grandchildren. It's going to spoil Archie and Lilibet. Absolutely rotten. Harry laughed, a sound of pure joy that William had missed more than he could express. Good. They deserve to be spoiled by their grandfather. Over the next several hours, the brothers talked about everything and nothing. They shared stories about their children, laughed about old memories, and began tentatively planning Harry's return visit to England. They talked about the practical considerations, security, media attention, family dynamics, but mostly they just talked like the brothers. It'd always been underneath all the pain and misunderstanding. As dawn began to break over the California hills, William realized that something fundamental had shifted. The angry, bitter man who had answered the door the previous evening was gone. Replaced by the brother William remembered from their childhood, funny, kind, passionate about helping others, and deeply loyal to the people he loved. I should probably head back, William said reluctantly as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Catherine will be wondering where I am, and I have that engagement with the Welsh rugby team tomorrow. Already? Harry asked, and William was touched by the disappointment in his brother's voice. This isn't goodbye, William assured him. This is just the beginning. We have years of catching up to do, years of memories to make with our children together. Harry stood up and pulled his brother into a fierce hug, the kind they had shared as children when one of them was hurting or scared. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me, for bringing Dad's letter, for reminding me what family really means. Thank you for having the courage to forgive, William replied. Thank you for being willing to try again. When they finally pulled apart, both men were crying again, but these were tears of joy and relief rather than pain. They walked back toward the house together, and William was struck by how different everything felt.
Oh.
The same garden, the same house. But the atmosphere had been completely transformed by the power of love and forgiveness. Megan was waiting in the kitchen with fresh coffee and breakfast for William before his journey back to the airport. The children were still sleeping, but she had prepared small gifts for them to give to their Uncle William, drawings they had made. A photo of the family, and a letter Archie had dictated to his mother, expressing his excitement about meeting his grandfather. Thank you, Megan said quietly as William prepared to leave. I know this couldn't have been easy for you, coming here not knowing how Harry would react, But you saved our family. You gave us back something we thought we'd lost forever. Family is worth fighting for, William replied, echoing the words he had spoken to his father just days earlier. Even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible, love finds a way. As William's car pulled away from the house, he looked back to see Harry and Meghan standing in the doorway, waving goodbye. In a few weeks, Harry would board a plane to London with his wife and children. There would be awkward moments and difficult conversations as they all learned to be a family again. The media would have a field day, and there would be challenges none of them could anticipate. But none of that mattered in this moment. What mattered was that a father and son had found their way back to each other, that brothers had remembered what it meant to love unconditionally, and that two little children would grow up knowing their grandfather and their cousins. William pulled out his phone to call Catherine, eager to share the news that their family was whole again. Lifted off from LA's hours later, carrying him back across the ocean to his own life and responsibilities, William smiled through his tears. Sometimes the most important doors we open are not physical ones, but the doors of our hearts, and when we have the courage to open them wide, love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The story that had begun with a simple knock on a study door had become something beautiful, a testament to the enduring power of family, forgiveness, and the courage to choose love over pride. And as William settled into his seat for the long flight home, he knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning, the first chapter in a new story of healing, hope, and unconditional love.